this has been. It has been absolutely incredible. When I was at school, I did this program called Future Problem Solving, which is something like this. This takes it to the next level. But I think the first thing in problem solving is identifying what the problem is. And one of the things that I've been truly impressed by today is the insight that you all have to really get to the root cause of many of the problems that we're facing today. And then you add on top of that all the creativity that you have in developing your solutions. So I have been inspired listening and watching to you. And to be honest, that future problem solving program is kind of what kick-started the rest of my career. I did it while I was at school, but it instilled in me a love of problem solving and of science and of engineering. And so that's where I went. I call this talk from Antarctica to space, but as I've just said, it started earlier than that. It really started when I was at school. So because of that love of problem solving, I ended up doing a Bachelor of Engineering in Industrial Chemistry. And before that, I had been one of those kids that changed my mind every day about what I wanted to do with my life. I'm still, apart from, yes, I'm absolutely sure I want to go to space. Apart from that, maybe I still change my mind a little bit. But that has kind of continued. But I found myself in engineering, and it was the right thing for me because of that problem solving and because maths had been my favorite subject at school. And after my degree, I was still, in that, what do I do next? And I decided to stay on and do a PhD. So I decided to study some more, and I was working on nanomaterials for hydrogen storage. So this is basically alternative energy applications, fuel cell vehicles. And this is because in all that, this interest in problem solving, interest in science, the most important one was my interest in the planet, my interest in the earth and the need that we have to look after it. And so my career has gone from that love of the planet that you all have into exploration. And so I'll take you a bit through that journey. So after my PhD, I was looking for some international experience. I had done all my school. I was born here, but did all my school in Australia. I ended up doing a postdoc in Italy. So I moved to Italy for what was supposed to be a 1 to 2 year postdoc. Ended up staying there for 9 years. And I was working again on materials for all sorts of energy-related applications. But at a certain point, I got this email that was sent around to all staff asking if anybody would like to go and spend a year in Antarctica to do atmospheric physics and meteorology. And I thought back to when I'd been about 12 years old, and I'd been to the International Antarctic Centre in Christchurch in New Zealand, and how fascinated I had been by Antarctica and everything that we learned there. And I thought, wow, that would be amazing. But I didn't apply, because I thought, you know what, there's no way they'll accept someone like me. I'm a materials scientist. I don't even know what atmospheric physics is. But then a year later, the email came around again for the following year, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to send them an email. So I wrote to them. They wrote back and said, yeah, come and have a chat. Turned out chat was an interview. And next thing you know, I was accepted and headed off to Antarctica, to Concordia Station, which is in the middle of the eastern Antarctic plateau. It's about 700 or 800 miles from the coast, very high altitude. And I was there to look after the atmospheric physics and meteorology observatories. We got down to a wind chill, as you can see there, of minus 104 degrees Celsius. Yeah, I bet you're all a little bit envious of that right now. No, I can tell you, it's crazy. And I was working outside every day, so I actually did get to experience those temperatures. But also, we're at high altitude, so very, very low oxygen levels, which makes it hard to do just about anything. And also, we had 100 days, I was there for a whole year. We had 100 days where the sun didn't set, and 100 days where the sun didn't rise. And during the winter period, which was from February to November, there was absolutely no way that anybody could come in and help us if something were to happen. So we had to rely on each other. We were this small international team. There were 13 of us, and we had to be completely dependent on each other. Some of my tasks were, I'll just go through a couple of them. I was doing some radiation measurements. And some of the radiometers are on this tower. This is a 45-meter high tower. It's about close to a mile away from the base, so I had to trudge out there. You can't use any skidoos or anything during the winter because it's just too cold, they won't work. So we'd walk out there, dig up the snow so we could get down to the harness underneath, put the harness on, climb up the tower 45 meters, clean all the instruments, come back down again and trudge back to the base. So it was the toughest part of the week. It was something I did on a weekly basis. But it was also the best part of the week, because my colleague and I would use that time to let our eyes adjust to the darkness, take our headlamps off and just look up at the polar night sky, which was incredible. I felt like I was completely blanketed by the stars. You could almost reach out and touch them. Shooting stars everywhere. And if it was a moonless day, I could look down and see my shadow in the light of the Milky Way. That's how bright the stars were. So it was such an inspirational environment to be in. Though to be honest, most of the time I was walking around with basically a hairdryer and a paintbrush and removing any snow and ice buildup from the various instruments around the base. Another thing I had to do was to launch the weather balloon. Weather balloons are launched at the same time every day all around the world, and they go into giving us our weather predictions, but also into regional weather and climate models, and they go into global data as well. Concordia Station is usually not very windy, but as you'll see in a minute, on this particular day, which happened to be my husband's birthday, which is why there's a happy birthday Liam message on the balloon, it nearly took me away with it. But most of the time it wasn't like that. So I learnt a lot while I was there. I was inspired by this incredible environment, but I also learned a lot about myself. Before I went there, the thing I was worried about was not the cold. It was not the fact of being with a small group of people for this long period of time. It was that I didn't know that I was going to be able to do the things that were outside of my comfort zone, work on electronics and programming, things that I hadn't done a lot of before. And so I thought I wasn't going to be able to fulfill my tasks. But I got there, and I had 2 weeks of handover with the Winter Over crew before me, and I loved it. I loved that steep learning curve, and I discovered that I could pick up new skills because I tried, and I enjoyed it. And so that gave me the confidence to think, okay, yes, I can do something else. So that made me decide that I wanted to take this to the next level. In Antarctica, I was the custodian of other people's experience, the custodian of people who had put their life's work into designing these experiments but couldn't be there in Antarctica to be the hands. Well, I wanted to do that, but in space. And that's what astronauts do on the International Space Station. So it was good timing because a couple of years later, the European Space Agency opened up applications for the first time in 13 years. And so I was absolutely going to apply. I did not think I would get through. There were 22,500 people that applied, so I didn't think it was going to happen. But, I got through every stage. It started with sending in a CV and motivation letter. Then we had some computer-based testing on things like maths, physics, logic, hand-eye coordination, memory. Then we did psychological testing, interviews with psychologists, but also teamwork and pair work exercises. Then we went through a week-long medical selections. They did every kind of medical test you can imagine. And then we had a panel interview, just like any job, but this one was, looking back, probably the hardest part of the whole process for me. And then just a final interview with the Director General of the European Space Agency so that he could decide on the final 17 people that he wanted to select. And in November 2022, the astronaut class was announced. And as I said, I was so surprised every step that I got through. And then when I got this call as I was riding my bike home from work in Bologna, I felt my watch vibrate, and I thought, I'll have a look. Oh, that's a number from France. The headquarters of the European Space Agency is in Paris. So I thought, better take this one. Pulled my bike aside, and sure enough, it was the Director General calling me to come and be on stage.